Well, Daryl, how are you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing great, doing great. Thank you for coming on the show. Could you go ahead and give us a brief bio and some of the big ideas you're interested in?
So, my name is Daryl Fairweather. I am the Chief Economist at Redfin. As the Chief Economist of Redfin, I study the housing market and I direct our economic research team in coming up with research that is relevant to the housing market, to home buyers, sellers, real estate agents, and basically anybody who is interested in following it. I speak regularly on topics like housing affordability and other housing market topics. And before working for Redfin, I worked for Amazon as a senior behavioral economist.
Cool. Can you tell us a little bit about exactly what Redfin is and does, and if possible, contrast it with Zillow? Like most people know Zillow and Redfin and kind of think of them as the same thing. But if you could tell us a little bit about what Redfin is specifically and how that all works.
Sure. So Redfin, we're most known for probably our website and app, but we also have a full real estate brokerage, a mortgage company, a rental company now. So, and also title company. So we really are full service when it comes to finding a place to live. Zillow is a website as well. They, for the most part, don't have a full staff of agents. Actually, I don't think they have any agents now at all. They did for a while when they were engaged in iBuying, which Redfin does as well, but Zillow shut down their iBuying unit. So Zillow mostly has advertisements for agents who are outside of Zillow. They might work for another real estate agent. And then maybe Zillow has some ancillary businesses, but I'm actually not 100% familiar with everything that they do.
Cool. So that's really interesting. Now, one thing that's very interesting to us, one of the reasons we had you on the pod, is you work for Redfin. This is major real estate broker in the United States. And at the same time, you're advocating for fixing the housing crisis, advocating for fixing this affordability crisis. I mean, to put it kind of bluntly, aren't high prices good for your employer and real estate professionals in general? I mean, is there more to
No.
the story? Well, tell us all
uh,
about it.
it's not really good for anybody that housing is the way it is in this country. There's a lot of market inefficiencies, things like NIMBYism, also just like the way that we tax land and property is not as efficient as it could be, which means that we don't build as many homes as we probably should be to meet demand. We underbuild. And even in working for a real estate brokerage, we want people to be able to move, to be able to buy homes. Those are our customers. We want more customers. We'd rather have more customers than charge the customers we do have more money.
That makes a lot of sense. You mentioned two interesting things there. Uh, there's a couple of things restricting supply and kind of driving housing prices up. NIMBYism and kind of inefficient tax structures. Can you talk about those two separate things and how they contribute to the housing crisis?
Sure. So I will start with NIMBYism. NIMBYism is it stands for not in my backyard. Back in like the 1970s, it referred more to things like industrial projects going in a neighborhood, but then it kind of evolved into residents really being opposed to any kind of development in a neighborhood. So you buy a home in a certain area, maybe all the homes are single family homes. Um, there aren't any shadows in your backyard from taller buildings. You have a view of, say, the lake. Nothing's blocking it. And then you start lobbying to protect that, to make sure that no large apartment buildings go in that might block your view or cast a shadow, even if it means that housing for everybody else is unaffordable and inaccessible. So it's kind of just basically a shorthand for, I think, being kind of selfish, valuing your property value, your view, your neighborhood character that you want more than building a neighborhood that is welcome for all people or for more people to be able to afford and live in. So unfortunately, NIMBYism, it's like a consequence of, I think, incentives. Homeowners are incentivized to protect themselves, not to think about things more at a larger level. We could address that. I'll pivot with a land value tax. So a land value tax is basically the idea that you extract the value of the land and redistribute it back to a community because nobody really owns the land, right? I mean, I guess maybe that's debatable, but it's based on the idea that we all collectively own the land. And so if you build on a certain plot of land, you should be paying some kind of rent for using that land. Anything you do in terms of the structure would be yours. We wouldn't tax that with a land value tax as opposed to a property tax. So you can build whatever you want, but the land value has to be shared. And the way that that can actually combat NIMBYism is that you would want to get the most value out of your land by building perhaps more housing on your land, instead of just letting the land stay as a single family home. And if you didn't want to do that, then you would more likely want to move somewhere else where the land value tax was lower, where you wouldn't be impeding on other people's ability to get the full value of the land.
So it sounds like there's kind of a different incentive structures. So if we tax property, then we'll get less productive uses out of the land. And if we tax the land, we won't. We'll get less speculation. Is that like a fair framing of what you're describing?
Yes, I think less speculation because the value would be extracted. It wouldn't be something that you would bet on. And I think that that is more equitable just in terms of like how we distribute the value of land. It's not all going to the people who are just around earlier to buy it before the value went up. The value would be more reflective of all the people who contribute to that value. Because like, if you're in a place that has really exclusionary zoning, say San Francisco, for example, and you bought your home, let's say in the 1970s, the value of that land today is mostly attributable to the tech sector, and you personally buying a property, like you didn't contribute to that necessarily. So redistributing it back to the whole entire city would make that a bit more fair.
Now, Daryl, you're chief economist here at Redfin. So as an economist, what led you to these policy conclusions? What's the theoretical basis for them, and how did you personally encounter them?
So at Redfin, as the chief economist, our team, the economist team, studies the housing market, and our directive is to just inform people on what's really going on. So just telling the truth is a big part of what we do. We do the research and then we report on it. We try to report on it as factually as possible so people know what they're getting into when they buy a home. They understand why values keep going up, why housing affordability keeps getting worse. And you can't really explain that without talking about things like NIMBYism or property tax structures. These are the root problem. These are the root thing or policy choices that have gotten us into the situation that we're in today.
Now, you've shared some videos on your Twitter. One of them you shared was the housing crisis is the everything crisis. Now, I've heard of this theory before, which is also known as the housing theory of everything. And can you explain what this theory is about and what your thoughts are about it?
Yes. So, well, I think there's two parts of it. Part of it is that housing affordability issues cause a whole lot of other problems in the economy. So when housing prices go up, people have to devote more of their income just to housing. They're not able to buy other things. They're not able to consume. They're not able to invest in things outside of land, which doesn't like add productive capacity to the economy. It's just land. And that makes the economy overall less productive than it could be, and it makes us poorer as a society. I think another way to think about the housing theory of everything is that what's wrong with the housing market is really what's like the root cause of what's wrong with the housing market when it comes to things like NIMBYism is what could potentially be our downfall with other big crises like climate change, for example. If people have this mentality that they're only going to be concerned about themselves and they're going to block policies that could potentially help everyone if we all just, stop thinking so individually, that's going to prevent us from making investments in a carbon free or neutral future. So those are two ways I think about how if you understand what's going on in housing, you can really understand how we're failing as an economy and every other aspect.
So one question I want to follow up on there is that inflation is really bad right now, right? And as an economist, I'm sure you have opinions about inflation. Now, housing inflation, according to your argument here, seems to be kind of a separate sort of thing from like bread inflation, but on the same time, like I guess my plumber and a nanny or whatever, any laborer who has to live in the city has to pay rent in the city. And so the cost of that labor is probably affected by some degree by housing affordability. So to what degree is just, and then you pay more for a nanny or a plumber. I'm not an economist. I don't know. You please correct me. To what degree is inflation, to what degree is it or is it not driven by the housing crisis?
So I'm going to separate out inflation and stagflation. So inflation, the kind of inflation that the Fed has control over, is driven by increases in demand for something. And increase in demand for something could cause home prices to go up. It could cause the price of bread to go up. And the root cause of that is that there's too much money flowing around in the economy. There's too much demand. If you just want to reduce that, you increase interest rates, reduce the money supply, demand goes down. The other side of that is stagflation, which is driven by a lack of supply. And the primary reason that housing prices are so high is not because there's too much demand, it's because there's not enough supply. And that's not something that the Fed has any control over. The only way to increase supply is to increase the productive capacity of our economy. And that's just a fancy way of saying, like, we need to just stop doing things that hurt us for no reason. Like having single family zoning is just like a very silly policy choice. We all know we shouldn't have it. If we want to improve housing affordability, let's just get rid of it. Or things like having a carbon tax, for example. That's kind of a straightforward thing that a lot of economists agree on. If we did that, then we would get a lot closer to a carbon neutral future, and we could even redistribute the gains of the taxes so it doesn't hurt low income people who tend to consume more carbon relative to their income. So there's a lot of economic solutions that I think most economists agree on that we should just try to figure out a way to do. But I think this goes to my political economy side. I did take a course in political economy at UChicago when I was a grad student. And the main takeaway from that is that we don't get a lot of these policy solutions that seem straightforward because it's just difficult politically to get people to vote in the interest of everyone instead of their own personal interests. And that can create some like bad policies.
I have one real quick thing going back to a word you said. You said stagflation. Could you just define what that is for our audience?
So stagflation is an increase in prices that is caused by a reduction in supply. A big example of this was, actually we can point to an example right now. We're experiencing stagflation from the war in Ukraine. We aren't buying oil from Russia, so we have less supply of oil, and that has caused an increase in gas prices. And the Fed, if they try to raise interest rates, it's not really going to solve that problem. It will reduce the amount of money in the money supply, and people will buy less oil, but they won't there still isn't enough oil for what we would want. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, my understanding of the word, I first heard it referred to from the Carter administration, that traditional macro problem is inflation because economy is growing, but we also have inflation. So good thing and bad thing. And stagflation, I think, is the stag word, is that stagnant plus inflation? Like economy is not growing and you have inflation, so two bads? Is that?
Yes, I think that I never actually thought about where that portmanteau came from, but that makes a lot of sense. Yes, the economy is not growing. It's not that we have too much demand. Demand is a good thing. You just have to make sure it's not too much. But a reduction in supply is overall bad. And then if you reduce demand, then you're making things worse on top of that. And it's like you're getting punched from both sides just to fight inflation.
So the point is you can't use your traditional monetary policy lever of pick a point on the trade-off between growth and inflation to solve stagflation. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, there is no there is no trade-off. It's just worse all around. I mean, inflation is bad in and of itself, so you can't let inflation get too bad because of stagflation either. The Fed, like they did during the oil embargo and the issues in the 1980s, they had to raise interest rates then too. So anyway, this is kind of a tangent.
Daryl, you mentioned something really interesting earlier around the political economy of just general problems around political economy and passing things that would be good for the collective, for all of us. Particularly, I'm thinking around NIMBYism. It seems like a real challenge to solve NIMBYism because these decisions are made, zoning decisions are made at the local level. You can go down to your town council, start yelling, I don't want this, high density housing project to go up in my backyard. For X reason, it might drive my property values down. And there's this concentrated kind of incentive for me to prevent this from happening. And kind of this, we would all be better off, but it's a smaller incentive for all of us to kind of band together and prevent this person from stopping us from building more high density housing. What can we do to solve that kind of problem? Is it move these kind of zoning decisions up to the state level or the federal level, or is it some other solution?
I think that going to the state level has been somewhat effective, and that's what California has done. They're still getting a lot of local opposition, but they have been pretty good about standing up to that local opposition and really going after municipalities that try to evade the zoning laws. I still think that it's not a perfect solution to go to the state level because I think we do want communities to be on board, and the only way to really achieve that, I think, would be like through some kind of PR campaign. We got people to stop littering. People used to litter all the time, and now they don't. Now the highways are clean, even though like it's easier to throw your trash out the window. We got people to stop doing it. So I think we could do something like that for NIMBYism.
So it's something where we just need to shame people who don't want to build, and if we shame them enough, perhaps we can kind of get there.
I don't use shame. I would say like indoctrinate.
So something more like the YIMBY movements. I mean, we're already starting to see some policy wins come out of the YIMBY movements where they're starting to repeal some blanket single family zoning policies. Is that kind of more along the lines of the campaign you think would be successful?
Yeah, I think just educating people on on what's actually happening, on why NIMBYism is bad. I think just changing people's hearts will help even more. I think it's a state level response and changing people's hearts. I don't think the federal government can do a whole lot because, I mean, it would violate the Commerce Clause, I would think, for them to get directly involved in zoning. They can use carrots and sticks like how they do with alcohol ages. They like withhold state funding for highways or something like that. They could withhold funding for states that don't get their zoning under control. But I don't think that is going to work because California is already being punished for having bad zoning. They're losing people to states like Texas and Florida. So if it was just about residents seeing the error of their ways because they're losing tax revenue, then would already have this problem solved.
So following up on that, on political viability, so the YIMBY movement seems to be onto something, and hopefully they'll continue to succeed. The other half of your policy proposal is property tax reform. And I've seen some property tax reformers who are also land value tax advocates advocate for what they call a revenue neutral property tax shift. And the idea here is if your local appraisal district or property tax district collects $1 million, because that's the budget, then you just assess the value of the land, ignore the buildings, and collect the same amount of money, but just from the land this time. What do you think of that kind of proposal? Do you think that's something that could be an easier sell? Or have you ever heard that specific policy proposal proposed before?
Yes. I think that where I want to learn more is that part of assess the value of the land, because I think there's a lot of hand waving that goes on at that step. And it would be a big burden bureaucratically to assess the value of the land. I mean, we already have property taxes. So obviously we're like capable of estimating land value or property value. But if that's going to be the major way that we solve this problem, I think we're going to have to be pretty careful about how we assess land value and try to think through that. So here's why I think it's hard. Land value isn't fixed. It can change. Things like air quality would affect it, access to jobs, access to parks. It's subjective. You could include non-monetary or non-pecuniary, like dollar value things in it, like how much carbon could potentially be captured if this land was turned into a park. How much do we value carbon then? Like you can go down a lot of rabbit holes when trying to figure out how to assess land value. And not to say it couldn't be done, but I think it's a bit more subjective than just some, professional appraiser coming in and putting a dollar value on it. It gets kind of complicated.
Right. It's interesting because we're actually somewhat involved in the field. We have a grant right now to do mass appraisal. And so one of the people working on a project is Paul Bedancet, who's worked for the International Association of Assessment Officers. And so we've been learning a lot about this. One of the things he talks about is recent advancements in mass appraisal technology. And I won't bore you with all the details, but one thing I would like your opinion on is, from the position of Redfin, you're sitting on a treasure trove of data for the whole, United States. What do you see in the world? Do you have any contact with valuation? You say you have an iBuyer program. To what degree is your access to data give y'all insights on the potential to do mass appraisal and things like that?
So I think that that just the fact that we have all this data and can put up a Redfin estimate, can make purchases based on these algorithms. It kind of goes to show how far we've come. And I think that it has had a huge impact on the market. But algorithms contain bias. They're not perfect. I mean, Zillow, I don't work for Zillow, but from what I've read, it seems that Zillow got caught flat-footed with their iBuyer program because they weren't being as, let's say, questioning of the outputs of their algorithm as they should be. So it's algorithms plus judgment when it comes to valuing a home. It's not just the algorithm. And we have a whole team of agents. So when our customers are looking at their Redfin estimate, their agent is also helping them understand, like, here's the context for the estimate and why your home may sell for more or less than that amount, or by how much more. So yeah, there's a lot of judgment that goes into it. That's why I'm still a bit skeptical that it can be deployed in a way that is efficient in the way that that the land value tax enthusiasts want it to be. And there's also just like bias that no matter how good we get or how much data we get are still going to be there. So racial bias can crop up. There's bias so Redfin did an analysis of how much a home is worth in a Black neighborhood compared to a white neighborhood when the home is exactly the same and the neighborhood's exactly the same, at least according to all of the data that we have. And homes in Black neighborhoods were valued, I think it was around $40,000 less than homes in white neighborhoods. And you could call that a problem with how like an algorithm might determine the price, but it's actually people on the ground who are determining the price, and they carry with them their own potential bias for where they want to live. So is that the correct value though, when you're coming up with something like a land value tax? And another factor too to be wary of is that even in property taxes, people can dispute their property taxes.
Right.
And the kind of people that dispute their property taxes tend to be wealthier and have more resources. They tend to be white on average. Whereas, people who maybe don't have the resources just end up accepting higher property taxes. So that's a bias that I would be worried about too. But I think the big question though it's always about trade-offs. Can we create a system that is more efficient, that is less biased than the current system?
Right. And how close do you have to get, right? Mm-hmm. I've seen, you can go into San Francisco and you can find an empty lot next to a $3 million home that's worth like 2.5 million, and it seems like the dirt's probably for both of those is probably worth 2.5 million. How close do you have to get? I mean, you don't need to do 100% tax on the land rental value, what's your margin of error? I mean, you don't have to put a number on it, but just like, can we put in a policy that's good enough even in the face of imperfect information?
I absolutely think that we can do better. And there's like a lot of just small ways that we could do better. One is like getting rid of something like Prop 13 that caps the increase in your property tax. We could try to value the land instead of the structure and not tax the structure. So we're not taxing investment. Yeah, I feel like it would, like, the current system is very flawed and we could do a lot of improvements. And then another option for municipalities besides land value tax is leasing land more often, because it's in effect the same thing. Like instead of giving a plot of land away to a developer, you just set a rent and then the city can charge the rent that they feel is appropriate. And they can even take auctions on the rent too. That's another way to assess the value, is to just have an auction and let the auction determine it.
Right. I've recently seen some talk about what's happening in trailer parks, for instance, and that a lot of the rents on trailer park land is going up. And that, I mean, trailer park land is literally a parking lot. I mean, it's a special case. So I wonder if, do you have any special insight in what's going on in the trailer park market right now?
I mean, I am pretty confident that it's a consequence of the housing affordability problem. People have been priced out of non-manufactured homes, and they have to resort to manufactured homes because it's what they can afford. The more inequality increases, the more demand there is for like the most affordable type of housing. So that doesn't surprise me.
I'm really interested in this talk about racial bias in assessments, right? So if we're basically trying to do is predict what a home will sell for, and so if all the people who are making offers are, well, frankly, racist, that might reflect, depressed value for this place. If racist people don't want to live here, But I guess in terms of like policy, which is the worst outcome if it's like, okay, I valued your property at its low, it's like, well, you pay low taxes. I've seen
Right.
some presentations on racial bias where the fancy guy's house who lives on a hill and it's worth $2 million, the property tax, it's like, oh, that land is worth nothing. So he pays like, not very, very little in property taxes. But this person here who lives in the projects, oh, that land's really, really valuable. So they're hit with this very high property tax. So, I mean, I was wondering if you could speak to that aspect of things where actually overvaluing your property can be a form of bias.
Yeah, I mean, when you're applying for a loan, you want your appraisal to be high, and when you're getting your property tax bill, you want your appraisal to be low. So there are different kinds of appraisals, and unfortunately for Black people, they get hit both ways when they're applying for the loan. There's a lot of anecdotes about Black people having to like take down pictures of their family, have a white person stand in so that they get a higher appraisal when they're applying for a loan. But then when it comes to the property tax bill, on average, Black people are hit with higher property taxes relative to white homeowners because of what we talked about earlier about white homeowners being more likely to appeal their appraisals when it comes to the taxes. So it can cut both ways. I think a land value tax, though, has the potential to correct for some of that innate injustice in how homes in Black neighborhoods are undervalued, because yes, they would get hit with a lower tax bill. And you could even have a negative land value tax, like maybe a place like Flint, Michigan, we should be sending checks to compensate for the way that their land value was diminished due to the lead crisis.
Oh, interesting. So like you destroyed land value, so you need to like, it's like a, what do they call it? A Pigouvian tax when you pay for something bad you've done. I guess that's what a carbon tax is.
Right. Yes.
And land value tax has often been paired with what used to be called citizens dividend. It is now called universal basic income. Is that another thing you were gesturing at with like negative land value tax, or is that a separate concept?
I hadn't heard UBI linked to land value tax in that way. I consider them separate policies. I'm not sure. I haven't heard that before.
Yeah, that's just the historical single tax Georgist movement. They often were like, okay, we'll do a land value tax and we'll use it to fund a citizen's dividend. You
could use it to fund all kinds of great things. I guess that's one good option, but there's a million options for what you could put the money into.
So one thing I'd like to pivot to is this notion of, I've heard this policy called value capture, which seems a lot like all the things you're advocating for, just in a specific use case. Like we put in that rail line, downtown, or we put in some transit and the land values go up nearby, but for some reason we can't fund public works and they all go bankrupt and it takes forever. And so some people are saying we should capture the value of those rising land values by building public works. Are you familiar with those policies, and do you have any thoughts on those, of the whole value capture with public goods spending?
The context I heard it in is in inclusionary housing. So if you give a developer the right to build like a luxury condos, a certain number of the units have to be priced below market value, and that is like giving back a public good. I think that they are an imperfect solution, but if that is what is politically viable, then it's better than nothing. But I think that a land value tax would be more efficient, because when you have that kind of mandate of including affordable housing in the condo unit, you may be discouraging a developer from considering the project. But I guess you could argue that the developers will do it anyway. And if they are doing it anyway, then I guess that supports that idea.
If you, by affordable, you mean rent controlled, right?
Yeah, or below market value. Yeah.
Gotcha. Daryl, recently you went on the Breakfast Club and talked about challenges facing the Black community around the history of redlining in the U.S. Can you talk about to what extent and degree this legacy still persists today, and kind of the mechanics that perpetuate it? I know you've talked about it a little bit already.
Yeah, so redlining was one of the discriminatory systemic functions in our housing market before the civil rights movement. So the way redlining worked was that banks would essentially draw lines around Black neighborhoods and would not lend to those neighborhoods. And because of things like racial covenants and mortgages, Black people also could not buy into the white neighborhoods where mortgages were being provided. So it was in effect, and it in effect prevented most Black people from becoming homeowners pre-civil rights era. The work of the civil rights leaders, Martin Luther King, the Fair Housing Act, redlining was abolished, but the effects still persist today because housing is one of the main ways that people build wealth in this country. It is a source of intergenerational wealth. People who are homeowners are more likely to have had parents who were homeowners. So there's like even just knowledge that's passed down, or a model that is set when your parents and grandparents were homeowners that Black people were prevented from experiencing. And it's one of the reasons that we still have inequality today. And it's an example of how the policies of the past and discrimination, segregation of the past is still affecting inequality today.
So Daryl, one question is a big thing that often comes in with the intersection of race and housing is this topic of gentrification. People move into the neighborhood and the prices go up, and there's tension between the current residents and the ones just moving in. I was wondering if you could talk about that, because sometimes it seems like, don't we want to improve neighborhoods, but how can we do it without kicking out the people who already live there?
Yeah, I don't love the term gentrification because I feel like it's just used so much that it's kind of lost its meaning. I think that what it is actually describing is the vulnerable position that renters are in when land value goes up. Because if everyone all of a sudden wants to move into their area, they don't own the apartment or rental that they're in, they now have to move because they can no longer afford to live where they are. And that is a disadvantage that is only really borne by renters and not by homeowners. What's interesting about a land value tax is that burden would now be shared by both homeowners and renters, because the land value tax would go up when more people want to live in the area because the land is more valuable when it's more demanded. So if we're trying to reduce inequality, I think that is another angle for why a land value tax would help the problems of gentrification. It wouldn't completely eliminate it, but I think it would make it so that the burden is not shared so unequally.
So, Daryl, you're chief economist at Redfin. Tomorrow I wave a magic wand and you're chief economist of the United States. What do you do?
I probably would start a commission to investigate a land value tax because that wouldn't be a very popular position because people wouldn't know what I'm talking about. But I think that is what I would do.
Cool.
Daryl, you're clearly a super smart person. You've worked at Amazon, University of Chicago, PhD in economics, incredible program. I'm curious, why spend time on this problem? Why housing? Is it because it is this like just fundamental thing? It's a huge lever, or is it something else?
So I specialized in behavioral economics when I got my PhD, and I also first started studying economics during the housing crisis. I worked as a research assistant at the Boston Federal Reserve in 2009, and I surveyed homeowners who were facing foreclosure or who had recently entered foreclosure about the roots of why they got in that position. I asked them all kinds of questions about their income, their employment, their health history, things about their knowledge of finance, how risk averse they were, how much they understood the terms of their mortgage. It was like a really long survey and I gave it hundreds of times. And it really just made me realize like how housing is this huge financial decision that people take and they have no experience going into it. So it's a very prime example of where people can make mistakes, because whenever you're doing something you've never done before, that's when all the biases start to kick in. And it's a very emotional decision too, because it's your home, it's where you live, and in America, homeownership carries so much emotional weight for people. So for someone interested in behavioral economics, studying the housing market is perfect.
So Daryl, one question I have is you got your studies at the University of Chicago. There's this whole school in the non-university sense of economics called the Chicago School. And I was wondering, I'm fairly familiar with that school of thought, but this seems like an entirely I don't hear most people talking about land when they talk about economics, at least not until recently. Mostly it's like capital and labor and interest rates and supply and demand, but like land seems like a relatively new part of the discourse to me. And I was wondering if you could situate what makes land special economically.
I feel like land was discussed a lot when I was in graduate school, because it's the perfect example of an inelastically supplied good. When you're going through like what is an elastic good versus an inelastic good, land is the prime example. It can't be created; it just exists. So its value is determined by demand, not by supply, because supply is fixed. And then housing is another. It's like an in-between, because in the short run, housing is inelastically supplied. There's a fixed amount, but then over the course of a couple of years, you can build, or even maybe 1 year, you could build another housing unit. So in the longer run, it is more elastically supplied. So housing came up again and again in my studies as examples of how the economy works.
Yeah, I never got an economics degree, so I don't know what they're teaching in schools these days. But it's interesting to me because like the Chicago School of Economics is very associated to a ignorant lay person like me with this what's the guy's name, Milton Friedman, very libertarian, but I guess he was a land value tax advocate too.
Yeah, he understood economics. He was one of the best in terms of understanding economics. I don't agree with all of his views. I think sometimes he tried to apply economics to things that are more nuanced than that, probably require more of a sociological or psychological lens, but he definitely understood economic principles.
Definitely interesting person. We had his son on a couple of weeks ago on the podcast. I'm curious, Daryl, do you mind if I throw out a couple of explanations for the housing crisis and just have you talk to them? There are things we haven't kind of covered so far.
Sure.
Okay. So the first one is, corporate investors are just buying up all the homes. What do you think about that?
They're not buying them all up. By our estimates, they bought up 18.4% of homes at the end of last year.
Nice. Perfect.
Can I just say that's so cool that you have that number?
Awesome. It's in my notes.
That's good. That's good. What about foreign investors? Are foreign investors buying up all our homes?
We don't have great data on that because most foreign investors buy through like a trust or an LLC or something like that. But anecdotally from our agents, it's really only comes up in a handful of markets, and it's not by any means like the majority.
Gotcha. Now, I doubt your coding has this specific one in it, but I'm just gonna ask it anyway. Are tech bros buying up all our homes?
Okay, this one maybe. I don't know. I mean, it's not. Can it be tech bros and sisters? Like, does it have to just be so gendered? I'm sure that there are women out there who are buying up homes too. But it is true that Californians are leaving expensive metros like LA, San Francisco, and are moving to the center of the country, the Sun Belt, or just a more affordable inland metros. And they are the ones buying the homes. People moving in from outside a metro area often have much bigger budgets than the locals. So if it feels like all these outsiders are the ones who are buying the homes, there's some credence to that.
Okay, yeah, my bad on that one. But interest rates, is it all just because of interest rates? To what degree do interest rates drive housing stuff?
Interest rates matter, but it only affects the demand side of the equation. In the short run, it only affects the demand side of the equation. The supply side in the short run is fixed. So when interest rates went down in 2020, it did create an excess of demand. I think a lot of that demand was just pulled forward, and we're going to see some slow demand for the next year or two to compensate for that strong demand on the last 2 years. So it affects things, but it doesn't really impact the fundamental problem that we haven't built enough homes for everybody who wants to buy them.
So some people have said, okay, there might be a recession coming. Housing market's starting to cool now that they twiddled with the interest rates. It's a bubble. It's going to burst and everything's going to be okay. Like whether there's a recession that destroys us all, will it at least deflate the housing market, or are things going to continue to get worse?
If there's a recession so bad that it deflates the housing market, but that's a very bad recession. So I don't think we should be wishing for that or expecting that or hoping for that. The last housing crash was very special because the recession started in the housing market. The problems of too loose lending, of securitizing mortgages, creating these complex debt products, and just the real root problem was the belief that home prices only go up and don't go down. We are not at that place right now. At most, I would maybe say we're in a 2001 situation where the housing market had been really strong going into 2001. There was a mild recession. The housing market kept going up through it and then kept going up and kept going up and kept going up and kept going up until it burst in 2007. So the fact that interest rates are up right now, I think helps us avoid that future, because we're very far from it right now.
Okay. And so, yeah. So we shouldn't expect, so would you say that, can you make a prediction? It's okay if you can't, that prices have been going up pretty steadily. Is it now at least getting worse slower?
So prices spiked in 2020 and 2021. They went up. Let me look at the exact numbers. They're up 14% right now. Wait, hold on a second. I know we're not live, so I can look this up. Should have this ready. Okay, so the median sale price is up 15% from last year. And it was up even more, it climbed even more between 2020 and 2021. This next year, we expect home prices to close, or at the end of this year, we expect home prices to close up around 7%, and then for home price growth to slow to around 3% after that. These forecasts are always subject to change as interest rates change and our numbers change, but that's about what we're forecasting right now. So basically, we're expecting home price growth to slow, but to remain up each year.
Keep heading north. So I'm curious, you mentioned something interesting about 2008. Do you think 2008 is a good example of a bubble, or is it more like a market monitorist thing where housing prices have some kind of like random walk, and it wasn't really a bubble, it was actually fairly efficient back in 2008? Because I know you worked on this in 2009, kind of coming out of it, kind of talking to people about what had happened with in a lot of individual cases.
Yes, it was a bubble. The lead up to the housing crash was built on the belief that home prices would not go down, despite the fact that home prices were climbing at an unsustainable rate. People kept that belief, and it allowed them to make riskier and riskier bets, like lending to people who wouldn't be able to afford their mortgage payments and would have to foreclose if home prices went down, creating debt products that were built off of those mortgages, and then creating financial products that were derived from those debt products. It was just a whole house of cards on top of the idea that home prices would never go down. I think that we're still pretty scarred by that experience, and just knowing that home prices could go down has prevented us from getting back into the same situation. Lending standards are much stricter now. Although home prices went up quite a bit in the last 2 years, almost all the loans went to people with excellent credit, with large down payments. Some people, a lot of times, people paying even cash. So even if home prices go down, those people aren't going to lose their homes, which is why the situation we're in is very different.
Right. So what regulatory things have changed since 2008? You mentioned a couple, but like broadly speaking, what provisions did we change from that? What lessons did we learn? What lessons did we not learn?
So the big one I would point to is Fannie and Freddie becoming government-sponsored entities, and their portfolios being managed by the U.S. government. Like, one thing that we did during the pandemic is we implemented forbearance. We were able to do that because of that kind of control we had over the housing market. We were able to put extra fees on things like second home mortgages, investor mortgages, large loan mortgages, which slowed down some of the exuberance in the housing market without hurting first-time home buyers quite as much. Yeah, so those two things have kind of shifted the risk that Fannie and Freddie have on themselves. And then I think even just from private markets have gotten more conservative. It's been a problem actually for new construction that builders have lost some of their risk taking because they're underbuilding, and they really do need some kind of government support to get back to a place where they're building enough to meet demand. Builders tend to follow the cycle, which means they're always a little bit late. They just got started and now interest rates are up, so they're already pulling back before they can actually build to meet like the next wave of demand. So it's just an inherent problem there. But lenders have gotten more prudent, I think, for the benefit of the health of the housing market.
So that reminds me of something, that was another factor we didn't talk about, is construction costs, right? Is some people say, well, oh, construction costs are just inflating and that's why housing's out of control. To what degree is that true or not true?
If you talk to builders, it's true. They have a lot of evidence to point to that. Labor costs are going up. Land costs affect them too, because how are you supposed to hire somebody to build a house in San Francisco? Where are they supposed to live? You have to pay them a certain amount. And if they're commuting in from Sacramento every day doing a 3-hour drive, you're gonna have to pay them more money. So you can get into these like cycles of despair with rising land costs that make it even harder to build. And also her immigration policy plays a role. I know builders would like the US to have immigration policies that allow more foreign workers into the construction industry, because they've had trouble recruiting them from Americans without that foreign labor supply. That's another political topic that is a whole different animal than just land value tax.
Well, so it's interesting, so you seem to be very focused on these kind of universal, get to the root of the problem kind of solutions. There's been some other proposals I've heard where it's like, oh, we just need to ban like second home ownership, or we just need to ban, we just need to like have a vacant lot tax, or we just need to like ban corporate buying of homes and all these things. So regardless of like political viability, what do you think of that kind of approach versus the ones you've just advocated for?
I just don't have a lot of patience for solutions that aren't going to help. I feel like it's distracting. I don't know. I know people, it's an easy thing to want there to be some like boogeyman for the problems that we have. But I think a lot of it, like going back to the housing problem of everything, is that we just like aren't thinking about things in a rational way of what would be best for all of us, instead of like this narrow-minded view of what's best for us individually in the short run.
So that's a really interesting take. I really like that. So what is, you'd mentioned before about solutions that are kind of equivalent to land value tax. You talked about like a government leasing, in that case, it's like, well, the land value is whoever gets the lease, and that's the prevailing market price, that lease, I suppose. And then the tax agency just collects that. How does that work in practice?
So it's, and like, if you're just like blindly writing a check, it's the same. It's exactly, the land value tax is the same as a lease. You're just paying the government a fixed amount each month. You can call it a tax, you can call it rent, it would be the same. So we already kind of do that in effect with property taxes. So I don't think it's like too hard of a pill to swallow. I think if we try to raise them too much, it might face some political backlash, because I do think that, especially in America, people like the idea that they themselves own the property and not the government. And if you make it too high, maybe people will start to question whether they own it or somebody else does. But I think we already do it in small doses, so we could at least try to increase the dose. Texas does it, and they're like the super freedom libertarian state, right? So if they have some of the highest property taxes, I don't see why California isn't doing higher land value.
Yeah, I'm from Texas actually, and so yeah, I can confirm. But what's really interesting is like you talk about like the problem of assessment and like we can do better. Like my property taxes just went up, and right now we don't have a split rate tax policy. Like they just tax the whole thing, so it doesn't really matter what the division is. But I looked at my bill and they're like, yeah, your house appreciated in value by this many like thousands of dollars, and I'm like, my house, this giant money pit that is constantly degrading in value, and I keep having to put more money into it just to keep it afloat, that's what went up in value? Like seriously, guys. I was wondering, just like a house is a depreciating asset in economics, right? I guess you would classify that as capital.
Yes.
Right.
I mean, the actual structure, you mean?
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. And so one of my questions would be, Is there, I know Singapore has these land leases you're talking about. I've heard that the Empire State Building was actually built on leased land. Do you have any, when you advocate for some of these things, if there's some particularly salient examples you like to point to, or is it mostly just something that you know from economics is a good idea?
I mean, my mom used to own a condo that was on a 100-year lease from the city of Austin. So it was in downtown Austin, pretty close to the capital. So this is something that cities and municipalities use. It can be safer for them because they might not know the value of the land moving forward. So if they're just charging one upfront fee to hand over the land, then they like kind of lose control after that point. So the lease can be helpful. It might be harder for them to do a property tax politically. Yeah, but to your question of like who's done it really well, I'm not sure. I feel like I should look into that a bit more.
What about, so one thing, if taxes go up, taxes can also go down, but we can also talk about what kind of taxes we have, right? We have property tax, we have sales tax, we have income tax, we have capital gains tax, we have wealth tax, inheritance tax. We got all the taxes you could possibly want. I mean, one political sell could be if land value tax goes up, some of these others come down. Which are your least favorite taxes and why?
That's a good question. It's like a question on a first date or something. Which is my least favorite tax? Any tax on something that is an investment for somebody of a lower wealth or income status would be like the worst tax. I'm trying to think what that would be. I guess if like a tax on on capital gains in a savings account or something like that is so silly that we even do that. And if you like get $2 extra, you have to like go report it. I mean, I don't think this is like really the biggest issue in America or anything, but just from like a purely why are we doing this perspective, anything like that.
What about like sales taxes on, some people often talk about like sales taxes are aggressive because they're mostly borne by the poor or whatever. Do you agree with that? Are there less worse sales taxes?
So sales taxes are disproportionately borne by the poor. There are different kinds of sales tax, like a blanket sales tax, I think would probably be pretty bad. You can have sin taxes, like taxing cigarettes, taxing liquor, taxing sugar, that I could see arguments for, but I guess I also see arguments against that. You don't want the government telling you what you can and can't eat or something like that. Yeah, I guess sales taxes are not great. But some of them maybe you could justify. Like a luxury tax, maybe, you tax yachts because what do those rich people need so many yachts for? That's something that people might be down for. There's like taxes serve different purposes. There's taxes for collecting revenue and there's taxes for nudging people to do things that you want to do or punishing people for being, too wealthy.
So we're getting to the end here. We have two big questions we want to ask you before we see you out. One will be a big wrap-up question. Before we do that, I think I see what look like some board games in your background.
Oh yeah.
Is that the case? And what's your favorite board game and why?
My favorite board game is Castles of Burgundy, and it's my favorite because I'm good at it. I can beat just about anybody at it, so like that's my favorite kind. But the game that I like, where I don't care if I lose or not, is probably Castles of the Mad King Ludwig, because you get to build these cool little castles, and even if I lose, I still have fun.
Okay, cool. So I guess my last question is, it's like, so there's YIMBYs, there's LVT advocates. We definitely, I'll just out ourselves. We're definitely
Oh, really?
in that group. Yeah. You're talking to a pair of ardent Georgists here. Like we said before, we're working on an open source land valuation model, right? We have a grant from Astral Codex 10 to do it. And we were wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what locational factors have the greatest influence on land values. Like, where is land value the highest? And why? Like, people talk about like how LVT will ruin farmers. Like, is farmland out in the boonies particularly valuable, or is it really all about that urban land? What's the deal?
I do think it's mostly about urban land. If I guess we have to figure out, where does value come from? Is value the market price if nothing was built on it?
Yeah, let's use just the marginalist view of
Because
just like what people will pay
even
for.
Something like, because like land out in the boonies, one of the reasons it's not valuable is because there's no infrastructure connected to it. Like you would need to like lay down the plumbing, you need to get internet connection. So I think that in and of itself presents an interesting problem. Like one example is I would point to is South Lake Union. Before Amazon headquartered in South Lake Union, it was just like a bunch of warehouses. Nobody wanted to live there. And then Amazon moved in, they created all these jobs, and the land value went up. So in a world with a land value tax, would you charge Amazon for that? I guess maybe you would have to give them a negative land value tax at first to incentivize them to come in. And then, once they do what they do, then you increase it. But I think that some land value tax advocates hand wave away where land value comes from and how it's endogenous. So that's something that I would be really interested in researching and finding out more about.
Okay, so is that kind of like similar to the argument of it's like, okay, this land could have this value, but it's oppressed by zoning right now. And so if I can buy it up and then repeal the zoning, then poof, the value will go up because now you can build this on it. And so the kind of the value goes up. Was that kind of what you were talking about just now?
Yeah, it's just that land value is mutable. Like it's sometimes a
Right.
policy choice. Sometimes it's based on just the whims of whoever decides to set up and invest there and build out
Right.
jobs or investments or whatever it may be.
Let's do it a little narrowly then. So forget like Marxist theory of value or marginalist theory of value. Just I'm trying to predict the price that this would sell for in the market, assuming we restrict that just to land, right? What factors drive that? Is it just like you go near the city center and line go up, or what's the nuance?
I think if I was to create a function of it, the things I would want to put in my equation would be access to jobs, access to green space, access to transit, environmental factors like air quality, weather, demographics, because the people, a lot of the land value is who lives there, who like you want to move to New York because you want to be around people who live in New York and in the industries that are there. You move to LA to be in the entertainment industry. So demographics would be part of it too. That's where I would start.
Great. Well, Daryl, thank you so much for coming on the show. We really appreciate you taking the time. Where can people find you? Where should we send them? Where can people find your work?
You can follow me on Twitter or Instagram at Fairweather PhD. You can go to the Redfin news site, just Google Redfin News to see all of our research. You can find me on LinkedIn too, but I don't really check LinkedIn that much.
Awesome.
Cool.
Thank
Well,
you.
thanks for coming. I think we all learned a lot here, and I hope everyone follows you and reads all your cool research. And we wish you the best at Redfin.
Thanks. Good talking to you.